What happens when country music royalty collides with live television drama? What happens when decades of unspoken truths suddenly surface in front of millions? This is the story of a confrontation so raw, so unexpected. It left audiences stunned and daytime TV forever changed. The morning at the View studio began like any other, buzzing with pre-show chatter, crew members adjusting lights, makeup artists rushing between dressing rooms. No one could have predicted that by the end of this segment, social media would be on fire and producers would be scrambling behind the scenes. Joy Behar kicked things off with her usual charm, the set glowing under studio lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with a broad smile, "please welcome the Queen of Country Music, Reba McEntire." The crowd erupted in cheers as Reba stepped out, her burgundy blazer glimmering under the spotlight. Her red hair framed her face perfectly, but her expression carried an unmistakable seriousness. She took her seat, offered a polite nod to Joy, and crossed her legs calmly. A queen entering not a talk show, but a battlefield. "Reba," Joy began lightly, shuffling her note cards. "You've been making headlines again, new tour, new projects, but also a few strong words about the entertainment industry last week." Reba raised an eyebrow. "What words exactly, Joy?" Joy hesitated only for a moment. "Well, you said the entertainment industry has lost its way, that it's become too political." Some folks thought that was ironic coming from someone in Hollywood. The energy in the room shifted. The crowd's cheers quieted. Even the air felt heavier. Reba's jaw tensed, her posture sharpening. "I think people misunderstood what I said," she replied evenly. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward, eyes locked on her guest. "Reba, I watched that clip 3 times. You said, and I quote, 'Entertainment should stay out of politics, and celebrities need to remember their place.' That sounds pretty clear to me." Reba smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "There's a difference between entertaining and lecturing," she said, her southern drawl deepening. "I just think we've forgotten how to do the first without forcing the second." Sarah Haynes jumped in, her tone polite but probing. "But Reba, don't you see the irony? Saying we shouldn't make political statements, isn't that a political statement?" The country legend turned slowly toward Sarah, her gaze steady. "Sweetheart, it's not political to say people want peace. Folks turn on their TVs or come to concerts to escape, not to be told how to think every 5 minutes." The tension was thick enough to cut. You could see it in the shifting eyes of the co-hosts, in the stiff smiles of producers off stage. Joy, sensing things heating up, tried to steer it elsewhere. "Surely you understand, Reba, that artists have a responsibility when they have such a huge platform." Reba's reply was sharp. "Responsibility to who, Joy? To you or to the people who buy the tickets and pay for the albums?" The audience gasped, some clapping nervously, others murmuring under their breath. That's when Alyssa Farrah Griffin, who had been quiet until now, leaned in. "Reba, no one's saying you can't have your views. But your comments made it sound like artists shouldn't speak up at all. Isn't that a bit hypocritical? You've spoken out plenty over the years." Reba's laugh was dry and cutting. "Hypocritical? Let me tell you about hypocritical. Hypocritical is sitting at this table making millions of dollars and lecturing hard-working Americans about values from your Manhattan apartments." The crowd collectively inhaled. Joy's face turned crimson as she leaned forward, voice trembling with controlled anger. "Are you suggesting we don't have a right to our opinions because of where we live?" Reba didn't blink. "I'm suggesting you step outside your bubble once in a while before you decide what's best for everyone else." Whoopi's voice thundered over the table. "Hold on, Reba. You come on our show, our platform, and start attacking us personally? That's not how this works." The moment hung in the air electric, uncomfortable, and absolutely riveting. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. The producers gestured frantically from behind the cameras, unsure whether to cut to commercial. Reba sat back, unbothered. "I'm not attacking anyone, Whoopi. I'm just saying maybe the people out there, she pointed toward the audience, deserve to hear a little more honesty for once. The crowd erupted, half in applause, half in disbelief. This was no longer just a talk show segment. It was a cultural collision, a reflection of everything simmering beneath American pop culture. Fame versus authenticity, celebrity versus conviction. And as Joy attempted to regain control, her voice trembling just slightly, everyone watching both in the studio and at home knew they were witnessing something unforgettable. When the cameras finally cut to commercial, no one spoke. The hosts avoided eye contact. The air itself felt heavy, charged with unspoken words. And Reba? She simply smiled, adjusted her blazer, and whispered to the floor producer, "Told y'all I wasn't here to play nice." That was the moment daytime television changed forever. "That's not okay," Reba said firmly, her voice calm but unyielding. "And for the record, I'm not attacking anyone personally." She leaned slightly forward, her eyes steady even as the studio lights seemed to burn hotter. "I'm pointing out a disconnect, one nobody here seems willing to talk about." Joy's tone cut through the tension like a blade. "And what exactly is the real issue, Reba?" Reba paused, then turned her gaze directly toward the main camera, addressing not the panel, but the millions watching at home. "The real issue," she said, each word deliberate, "is that ordinary people are tired. They're tired of being talked down to, tired of being told they're wrong for wanting entertainment to entertain. They're tired of being made to feel small by people who think they know better than everyone else." A murmur rippled through the live audience. Then, finally, Sonny Hostin, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. "Reba, I have to push back on that. Are you saying that when artists talk about social justice, equality, or important issues, they're talking down to people?" Reba turned back to face her, her expression resolute. "I'm saying there's a time and a place for everything," she replied. "And maybe people deserve to hear a song or watch a show without having an agenda shoved down their throats." The tension was now thick enough to taste. The audience was dead silent except for the soft hum of the studio equipment. Joy's face had grown visibly red, her voice tightening as she leaned forward. "An agenda? Reba, fighting for human rights isn't an agenda. It's basic decency." Reba didn't flinch. "And who decides what counts as human rights?" She countered. "You? The Hollywood executives. The politicians you all seem to worship." Her voice rose slightly, cutting through the air like a whip. "What about the rights of people to think for themselves?" Whoopi suddenly slammed her hand on the table, startling everyone. "Now hold on just a minute," she said, her deep voice echoing. "Nobody's telling people what to think. But when you've got a platform, when you have influence, you've got a responsibility to use it for good." Reba's tone sharpened. "According to who, Whoopi? According to your definition of good?" The two women stared each other down, the tension between them almost physical. "That," Reba continued, voice rising to match Whoopi's, "is the problem right there. You all think you get to decide what's good for everyone else." The cameras caught every second the clenched jaws, the darting eyes of the producers, the uncomfortable fidgeting of the audience. The energy in the room was volatile, unpredictable. Joy tried to regain her footing, though her voice betrayed a tremor. "Reba, I think you're missing the point entirely. We use our platform to fight injustice, to help people who don't have a voice." Reba let out a short, humorless laugh. "Help people who don't have a voice?" she echoed, shaking her head. "If you really want to help them, stop treating them like they're too stupid to make their own decisions. Stop assuming they need you to tell them what to think about every single issue." A few audience members gasped. Some even clapped nervously, sensing the conversation had veered far beyond daytime television territory. Sarah Haynes, ever the peacemaker, tried to ease the tension. "I think what we're all trying to say, Reba, is that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Don't you agree?" Reba turned toward her, eyes blazing with conviction. "And I think what I'm saying, Sarah," she replied, "is that maybe your definition of injustice isn't the same as theirs. Maybe the folks you claim to speak for the ones working 2 jobs, trying to pay rent, feed their families, maybe they're more worried about putting food on the table than whatever cause is trending this week." The words hit like a thunderclap. Even the hosts who had been ready to jump in paused, unsure how to respond. Reba sat back in her chair, her gaze unbroken, her voice now cool and steady again. "You want to have real conversations? Fine. But don't pretend to understand the lives of people you've never met. Because the minute you do that," she said, gesturing toward the camera once more, "you're not helping them, you're talking over them." Silence followed. No one dared interrupt. The studio lights flickered slightly as the producers made a quick signal to cut to commercial. But before the cameras faded to black, Reba's final words still echoed in the air, raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. The studio erupted with uneasy murmurs, the audience shifting in their seats as the tension grew heavier by the second. Joy Behar forced a tight smile, her professionalism visibly fraying. "So you're saying," she began, her tone sharp, "that we shouldn't care about social issues because people have bills to pay? That's a false choice, Reba." Reba's reply came with chilling composure. "No, Joy. I'm saying maybe you should care more about connecting with people than lecturing them. Maybe you should try understanding their perspective instead of dismissing it." The cameras stayed rolling, live, unedited, and increasingly volatile. The control room was in chaos, but there was no way out. The conversation was spiraling, and everyone knew it. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, that familiar tone creeping into her voice, the one every regular viewer of The View recognized as a warning. "Reba, let me ask you something. When you see injustice happening, when people are being hurt, discriminated against, attacked, what do you do? Do you just stay quiet because it might make someone uncomfortable?" Reba didn't hesitate. "I help where I can, Whoopi, but I don't assume my way is the only way, and I sure don't attack people who see things differently." "Attack people?" Joy repeated, incredulous. "Reba, we're not attacking anyone. We're using our platform to speak truth to power." "Whose truth?" Reba shot back instantly. "Yours? The truth according to your writers, your network executives? Because I've got news for you. There are millions of Americans out there who have a different truth, and every single day you dismiss them as ignorant." Alyssa opened her mouth to interject, but Reba was on a roll now. Controlled, passionate, unstoppable. "You want to know what's happening out there? People are turning off their TVs, they're canceling subscriptions, they're walking away from entertainment altogether because they're tired. Tired of being preached at by people who live in a completely different world." Sonny's voice broke through, taut with restrained anger. "So what, Reba? We're just supposed to ignore racism? Ignore sexism? Pretend everything's fine just so no one gets uncomfortable?" "I'm suggesting," Reba said evenly, her Oklahoma drawl thickening, "that maybe your approach isn't working. Maybe talking down to people isn't the way to bring them together." The studio went completely silent. You could hear the faint hum of the cameras, the shuffling of papers. Joy's fingers were white from gripping her note cards too tightly. "Reba," she said finally, her voice shaking with a mix of frustration and disbelief, "I have to ask you directly. Are you saying fighting for civil rights is wrong?" "Don't you dare put words in my mouth, Joy," Reba snapped, her voice cutting through the air like glass. "I'm saying turning every song, every film, every TV show into a political lecture is wrong. Assuming anyone who doesn't think exactly like you is evil, that's wrong. Maybe try listening instead of preaching for once." Whoopi slammed her hand on the table. Listening to what, Reba? People who want to deny others their rights? People who want to drag us backward? No, thank you. Reba pointed straight at her, eyes blazing. There it is, right there. That attitude. You just proved my point better than I ever could. Anyone who doesn't agree with you, suddenly they're against human rights. Suddenly, they're the enemy. You can't even imagine that maybe, just maybe, there are good, decent people who just see things differently. Sarah jumped in, her voice trembling, but earnest. Reba, I think what Whoopi's saying is that some things are black and white, right or wrong. There's no gray area when it comes to basic human dignity. Reba turned toward her, her tone sharp but steady. And who decides what basic human dignity means? You? This table? She gestured toward the hosts. Because I'll tell you right now, there are families out there who feel their dignity is under attack when their kids come home from school being told their parents are bad people for their beliefs. Joy slammed her palm down, the echo startling the audience. Their beliefs? Reba, if their beliefs involve hating other people, then maybe their kids should hear a different perspective. Reba stared at her in disbelief. Joy, do you even hear yourself right now? You just assumed anyone who disagrees with you hates people. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The air was thick with fury and silence. Nobody dared breathe too loudly. Whoopi shook her head, eyes wide. Reba, when people vote against equality, when they vote against rights for women, for minorities, for LGBTQ folks, what do you call that? Reba didn't miss a beat. I call it democracy, she said, her voice firm, defiant. I call it people having different opinions about how to solve problems. You don't have to agree with them, but you don't get to silence them either. The audience gasped. The camera lingered on the table. Joy's clenched jaw, Whoopi's glare, Reba's unflinching calm. This wasn't just a segment anymore. It was an ideological explosion. Live, unfiltered, and unstoppable. You'd call it hate, Reba said, evenly, because it's easier than trying to understand why they think the way they do. Alyssa leaned forward, her voice tight but still measured, doing her best to hold the temperature of the room. Reba, surely you can understand why people get frustrated when they see others voting against their own interests, against their rights? Reba's tone softened for the first time all morning. Of course I understand frustration, she said quietly, but I also understand the frustration of people who feel like they're constantly being insulted, labeled, and dismissed for holding traditional values. I understand the frustration of people who feel like their voices don't matter anymore. Sunny immediately jumped in, eyes narrowing. Traditional values, she repeated with an edge. Reba, that's just code for discrimination, and you know that. Reba's eyes flashed. No, Sunny, she said, her voice sharp but steady. That's code for your interpretation of anything that doesn't fit your worldview. When most people talk about traditional values, they mean family, community, faith, hard work. But you hear those words and immediately assume it means hate. Joy's hands trembled slightly as she tried to keep her composure. Reba, she said, her voice rising, when those so-called traditional values are used to justify taking away people's rights, then yes, I do have a problem with them. And when your progressive values are used to justify destroying someone's career or reputation because they think differently, Reba shot back, I have a problem with that. When your values are used to justify calling half the country deplorable, I have a problem with that too. Whoopi stood up, something she rarely did during the show. Half the country, she repeated incredulously. Reba, we're talking about people who are actively trying to take away voting rights, reproductive rights, marriage rights. How are we supposed to just sit quietly while that happens? Reba didn't move from her seat. Her voice, low and commanding, rolled through the studio like thunder. You're supposed to listen, Whoopi. You're supposed to try to understand why they think the way they do instead of demonizing them. You're supposed to have conversations, not deliver sermons. Build bridges, not burn them. Build bridges with people who want to hurt others? Joy's voice cracked, now nearly shouting. That's not how this works, Reba. Some things are just wrong. And some things, Reba countered, her voice rising to meet Joy's, are just different. But you can't tell the difference anymore because you've been living in an echo chamber for so long you've forgotten what real people actually think and feel. The audience was frozen. No laughter, no clapping, no movement. The tension was electric, heavy, impossible to ignore. Sarah, desperate to regain control, tried one last time. Reba, I think we can all agree that everyone at this table wants what's best for people. We just disagree on how to get there. Reba turned to her slowly. Do we, Sarah? She asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like some people at this table think what's best for people means telling them how to think, how to vote, how to raise their kids, and how to live their lives. And if they don't fall in line, they get labeled as haters and bigots. The crowd was riveted. The cameras zoomed in on the faces of the hosts. Whoopi's glare, Joy's disbelief, Sunny's clenched jaw. The air in the studio felt thick enough to choke on. Whoopi finally sank back into her chair, her voice taking on a hard, dangerous edge. All right, Reba. Let me ask you something straight, she said, her tone icy. Do you believe gay people deserve the same rights as straight people? Chatiko's question hit the air like an explosion, the kind that silences everything in its wake. The audience gasped. The crew froze. Even the faint hum of the lights seemed to fade. Reba didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on Whoopi's, and for a long, loaded second, nobody breathed. The tension was unbearable. Everyone in the studio knew that whatever she said next, one way or another, would change everything. Every eye in the studio locked onto Reba, the air thick with suspense. You could feel it, the stillness before the storm. She drew in a deep breath, her gaze steady. And when she finally spoke, her words would ripple far beyond that studio. I think, Reba began, her voice calm but commanding, that all people deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. Everyone deserves to live their lives without fear, without being attacked or discriminated against. But I also believe that people have the right to their religious beliefs, and that those beliefs deserve respect too, even if you don't agree with them. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The audience erupted in a mix of gasps, murmurs, and scattered applause. Joy shot forward in her chair, her expression tight with disbelief. Religious beliefs? She repeated, nearly trembling. Reba, people used religious beliefs to justify slavery. They used them to keep women from voting. You can't hide discrimination behind the word religion. Reba turned sharply toward her, her composure finally cracking just enough to reveal the fire underneath. And you can't dismiss everyone's faith as discrimination just because it doesn't fit your politics, she shot back, her voice rising above the noise. The crowd went dead silent again. Every camera, every light was fixed on her as she continued. There are millions of people of faith in this country, she said firmly, who love their gay friends, who love their family members, who treat everyone with kindness, but who also believe marriage has a traditional definition. And instead of respecting that complexity, you label them as hateful. You call them bigots. Her words hung heavy in the air. Even the producers in the control room hesitated to cue the next segment. Joy's face flushed with anger. Because that traditional definition has been used to exclude people, Reba. She fired back. You can't separate those beliefs from the harm they've caused." Reba leaned in, her tone now both fierce and unyielding. "Then maybe the problem isn't the belief," she said, "but the way you've chosen to interpret it. You can't preach tolerance while mocking the people you expect to tolerate you." The audience broke into a mixture of stunned silence and spontaneous applause. Divided, conflicted, enthralled. In that moment, the bright lights of daytime television felt more like interrogation lamps. The conversation had shifted from entertainment to something far deeper, a mirror reflecting the cultural divide running straight through the heart of America. And as the tension lingered, Joy's hands trembled over her notes. Whoopi's jaw tightened and Reba sat motionless, eyes unwavering, fully aware that nothing on this stage or in this country would be the same after that moment.